If you ever pop by one of my streams, you'll probably have overheard that Nezha is by far my favorite all-time frame in the game. So much so that I've maxed out my configs just for different Divine Retribution builds that I've made since this amazing augment came out. And honestly, neither you nor I have the time to make a different video for each of them. So let's cover my 6 different Divine Retribution builds based around the different helmet options I personally enjoy. Goss's Thermal Sunder, Nova's Null Stars, Ember's Fireblast, Temple's Pyrotechnics, Coolerbow's Wrathful Advance, and Dante's Darkverse. All of these builds are incredibly fun to play, put out an insane amount of damage, and each have a bit of a unique twist to give you some fantastic options to customize to your personal enjoyment. As with anything that I make, I hope that these can be inspiration for you to make your own cool variation of these builds. So let me know in the comments what you like to do with your Divine Retribution builds and how you've customized them to fit your playstyle. Before we get into the builds, let's cover how the augment works, the general casting rotation, the things that stay the same across all of the builds, and the important question of how I'd like to deal with Overguard. First off, how does Divine Retribution work? When you spear enemies with Nezha's 4th ability, Divine Spears, any status effect that you apply to anyone who's speared will be copied to every enemy who's also speared, which as you can guess means that you can get some absolutely insane amount of status effects being spread around. But it'll also do something interesting with slash, heat, and toxin damage over time effects, where when the spear expires, either by you recasting the ability or just from duration, it'll condense the remaining damage of those 3 effects into one instance and deal their damage right away. Since all status effects are spread to each enemy who's speared, this means that with one cast of an ability, you can sometimes apply hundreds of stacks of heat, slash, or toxin, which will also all get a massive damage buff from the augment's 1.5 damage multiplier, which does scale with strength. So all of our builds today are going to focus on spreading those effects for maximum damage output, leading to millions of damage dealt to each enemy. Another thing to note with Divine Spears is that it doesn't require line of sight to enemies, meaning that it'll even hit people who are behind walls, which will come into play majorly with one of our abilities, but overall it's fantastic for all of them. The augment does reduce the base range of Divine Spears, so we're going to have to work around that in our builds, but even with that, as you can tell from the footage, it deals an insane amount of damage. For the casting rotation, it's a bit intense, but really enjoyable once you get into the swing of this high tempo playstyle. First, you cast Divine Spears to get all of your enemies ready for status spreading. Then I cast his second ability, Blazing Chakram, which will increase our damage dealt to enemies who are hit by it and also cause them to spawn a ton of health orbs and energy orbs, which is very important for our energy economy through the use of Equilibrium and Violent Shards turning those health orbs into energy. Since the Chakram will duplicate and bounce around to any enemy affected by Divine Retribution, Blazing Chakram will drastically increase your damage dealt and spawn more health and energy orbs than you know what to do with. Next, you cast your Helmet of Choice, which all of them will be subsumed over his first ability, Firewalker. As for this kind of playstyle, it's the only option we really have for a spare ability slot, and it also doesn't really have any interaction with what we're trying to do. You then recast Divine Spears to slam the enemies into the ground and activate the damage over time condensing feature of Divine Retribution. Some of these builds are going to have some variations to this, so I'll make sure to point those out where it's applicable. You want to keep his Warding Halo active at all times, as that's his survivability mechanic, which gives you 90% damage absorption and status immunity, making Nezha incredibly survivable. Since Warding Halo is a damage absorption effect, we can stack other sources of protection like armor or damage reduction from Null Stars or Adaptation if you feel the need for even greater levels of survivability. Armor will also affect the amount of damage absorption that Warding Halo gets when you cast it, so keep that in mind too if you're wanting to make some customizations to the builds, but I'm not taking advantage of that personally. So the rotation is keep Warding Halo active at all times, cast Divine Spears, Blazing Chakram at someone who's speared so that it duplicates, gives them damage vulnerability, and generates health and energy orbs, your Helmet of Choice for damage, and then Divine Spears again if you need to activate Divine Retribution. Archon Shards for the builds are going to be the same across all of them, so you don't need to worry about your bile resources swapping them in and out constantly. We have 2 Amber Shards for increased cast speed to really speed up our heavy casting we're doing. I definitely say these 2 are mandatory to the builds, just because of how much they improve the caster playstyle we're working with. Next, we have 2 Azure Shards for more maximum energy. As we're so mod intensive on the builds, I personally didn't find any room for a flow mod, so this is how we're going to be recovering from that deficiency. Lastly, I've got a Violet Shard that'll convert health orbs into energy, since we're literally going to be tripping over the amount of health orbs we have in missions due to Blazing Chakram. And energy is really going to be the major issue with nearly all of these builds, so we might as well take advantage of those health orbs. And for those of you wondering, yes, you do get the benefit of both Equilibrium and this Violet Shard, they do stack. For Focus School, I basically always run these builds with Xeneric for the energy regeneration that it offers us through its Energy Pulse passive and Wellspring ability. The only one I might change schools for is the Coolerbow's Wrathful Advance Advanced Build, where I do enjoy using Matter Eye for the 30% increase to physical damage from the Phoenix Talon's passive, increasing our heavy attack damage significantly with Wrathful Advance. Some of you may now be asking yourself, but Xenos, all we're doing is casting, how do we deal with Overguard? Overguard of course makes it so that our abilities can't touch the enemies, which messes with most of what we're trying to do. So that's a great question, and my answer is threefold. The first being Companion, like the Helminth Charger, Pharaoh Predacite, or Panzer Vogelphyla with the Assassin Posture, as they'll specifically go out and run down anything with Overguard on them, and all three will activate Archon Stretch with their abilities, which we do have on some of our builds, so we're able to double dip on their functions a bit in that way. If you need more information on how Archon Stretch gets activated by companions, or want to see my builds for those companions that I mentioned, I've linked shorts in the description going over all of those. Next, I like to run all these builds with my Nezha Prime, which with its high damage and status spreading from its alt fire, we're able to deal with most units with Overguard easily and quickly with the new Magnetic Strafe mod, as Magnetic will deal extra damage to Overguard units. On top of that, the alt fire will spread a ton of status effects to each enemy hit by its glaive, including Toxin, Heat, Blast, and Slash, which as I've said and we'll go over more throughout the video are all great statuses to use with Divine Retribution. When we combine that status spreading of Divine Retribution, that'll end up just giving us a ton more damage through those effects, the viral that we have modded on the Nezha increasing our damage by another 325%, and like I said, its Magnetic will help deal with Overguard. Another fantastic weapon option to use with all of these builds, especially with any of the heat-based builds, is my Epitaph here on screen, which will allow us to take advantage of Heat Inherent mechanic, increasing all of our heat damage significantly. If you don't know what Heat Inherent is or how it works, again there's another short in the description going over that. This will greatly increase the damage we deal, but if I'm gonna be honest, it's kind of overkill and not necessary. But it's a nice option if you'd like it. As you can see, I'm using 2 Augur mods on this, which will just help out with our survivability through its set bonus, as we're constantly going to be casting and thus constantly regenerating our shields. And Secondary Fortifier also helps with our survivability, but it's mainly there to help remove Overguard. Between Companions, the Nezha, and the Epitaph, I rarely have issues with enemies with Overguard. Alright, now on to the marathon of builds. First up, we're going to be going over what's arguably the easiest to use, the build based around Gauss's Thermal Sunder. Since both Thermal Sunder and Divine Spears don't require line of sight to the enemies, meaning that even if they're hiding behind walls, they'll be hit by both Divine Spears and Thermal Sunder. This will make this build arguably the easiest to utilize since you can just cast away to your heart's content as long as you have the energy to sustain it without a concern about getting your ability on target. For build-wise, we're using Growing Power for our aura to boost up all of our abilities with another 25% ability strength, and Cunning Drift for more range as that's the other stat that's super important for all of these builds. Of course, we have Divine Retribution, as will all of our other builds because that's what they're based around. Next, we have Archon Vitality, which will increase the number of heat stacks applied by abilities by 1, which gives us a ton more damage for all of our 4 different heat-based builds. One thing to note is that this extra stack of heat will also transfer over through Divine Retribution, meaning even more damage for its condensing feature. For more range, we're running Overextended and Augur Reach, and Reach will give us a bit more survivability as, like I said, Warding Halo is a 90% damage absorption ability, meaning that 10% of the damage will still go through to your Nezha, and this extra bit of shield regeneration is all he needs to keep him healthy even into level cap runs. Since we're running 2 other Augur mods with our Epitaph, we'll be getting 120% of energy spent into shields and overshields, making Nezha incredibly tanky. Next, I'm running Equilibrium to fuel our energy economy through its conversion of health orbs generated by Blazing Chakram into energy. I'm running Transient Fortitude, Blind Rage, and Umbral Intensify to really drive up those damage multipliers from Divine Retribution and Blazing Chakram, but to also help out the ability damage from our Helminth. Arcanes wise, I'm running Molt Augmented for even further ability strength and Arcane Energized to help with our energy. Our next build is based around Nova's Helminth Null Stars, which is definitely the most survivable of our builds today. Null Stars works amazingly with this build in 3 different ways. First up, it'll give us 75% damage reduction based on the number of antimatter particles flying around you, which scales with ability duration. As we said before, since Warding Halo is a damage absorption mechanic, Null Star's damage reduction will stack with it, giving us even greater levels of survivability. Next, the Null Star's Augment Neutron Star will give this build some really insane damage in 2 ways. When you recast Null Stars when it's active, it'll refresh all the stars around you and send the remaining stars from the previous cast out to nearby enemies, applying a blast effect, and with the augment a heat effect to each enemy hit, each enemy within range of its explosion, and of course each enemy affected by Divine Spears. Since Blast will cap at 10 stacks and then deal 300% damage in a 5-meter radius, then reset back down to 0, it can be activated multiple times. And with 1 cast of Null Stars, we're activating that Blast AoE multiple times on all enemies affected by Divine Spears, not to mention the potential hundreds of heat stacks it applies as well because of the augment. For its build, we're once again using Growing Power for more ability strength to boost up our damage, Cunning Drift for more range, and Divine Retribution because that's what the build's based around. Again, like with our other build, we have Archon Vitality, as with the Null Star's Augment Neutron Star, we'll be applying a ton of heat effects, and this will increase that even further as each star will be applying a heat effect, which Archon Vitality will make it apply 2 heat stacks, and with the 18 stars that this build has, means that each enemy hit by it or within range of its explosion will apply a ton of heat stacks to every enemy affected by Divine Spears. We're using Overextended to increase the Divine Spear's range and the AoE effect of Null Stars even further. Equilibrium is here for our energy regeneration due to the amount of health orbs we're generating. Prime Continuity will increase our duration as, like I said before, Null Star's number of particles scales off of duration and thus increases both our damage and our survivability. Then we have Blind Rage and Umbral Intensify to boost up our damage even further. Again, we're using Arcane Energize to help with energy concerns and Molt Augmented for further strength. However, you may want to swap in Molt Efficiency for even more duration, thus more antimatter particles for Null Stars, and thus more damage. For our third build, I have what I like to call the Squad Support build with Ember's Helmet Fireblast. Now, I call this one the Squad Support build because it's not necessarily meant to be the highest damage build, but one that helps your squad by bringing an armor strip through Fireblast's armor reduction function, which will decrease the enemy armor by 75% with one cast, and since it has such a fast cast speed, we're able to cast it twice for more heat effects being spread and also to get the 100% armor strip that's still very valuable in missions. One thing to keep in mind with this build is that its casting rotation is a bit different than the others. Instead of the standard Spears, Chakram, Helmet, Spears, we're going to be doing Spears, Chakram, Fireblast, Fireblast. Since we're going to be using the Blazing Chakram Augment Reaping Chakram on this build for more damage and even greater health orb generation, we'll be passively healing our squad as well through the insane amount of health orbs that we generate. You can also of course use Warding Halo's Augment Safeguard instead of Reaping Chakram for that full support playstyle, which will give allies Warding Halo, granting them 90% damage absorption, but with half of the total absorption amount that you receive. I just tend to prefer Reaping Chakram as a personal preference thing, but Safeguard is an excellent alternative to really lean into that support lifestyle. Fireblast will also knock down any enemies, giving a bit of crowd control in missions, but that shouldn't really be too applicable as they should be all on spears anyway, but that's just some more information for you. On the build, we're using Brief Respite for extra survivability of energy spent into shields, but it's not really that necessary, so feel free to throw on whatever aura suits you best. Again, we have Cunning Drift for more range, Divine Retribution because, obviously, Archon Vitality since Fireblast applies heat statuses, thus increasing the amount of heat effects, Overextended for more range, and Reaping Chakram for more health orb generation and a bit more damage as well. Now, unlike the other builds, we're using a down-ranked Fleeting Expertise, which will help us in 2 ways. First, being the 50% efficiency that it gives us, making our casting much more sustainable, but negative duration is actually helpful for this build as well. Like we mentioned earlier, Divine Retribution's dot condensing will activate on either recasting of Divine Spears or when its duration naturally expires, allowing this build to ignore the need to recast our spears, which as I mentioned, we're changing up our casting rotation to allow for 2 casts of Fireblast for the 100% armor strip. This will help to clean up the number of abilities we need to cast for the rotation. We don't want to have this mod maxed out as I find that much of ability duration reduction doesn't allow for the extra cast of Fireblast, but you may find that it's fine, so test out what works best for you. We also have Archon Stretch on here as, like I mentioned earlier, our companions will be activating the energy regeneration function of it, and of course it gives more range for our abilities. Next we have Transient Fortitude to give us more strength and minus duration. Like we said with Fleeting Expertise, this actually is helpful for us, and Umbral Intensify for more strength. Again, we're using Molt Augmented for more power strength to increase our overall damage, and the other arcane slot is a flex spot, so I'm using Molt Reconstruct for even more squad support, but throw on whatever works best for you. Now we're on to the big damage builds, the first of them being Temple's Helmet Pyrotechnics. This is by far my favorite build. Pyrotechnics is actually insane due to the amount of heat effects it can apply with one cast. Since each pillar applies heat effects in a 20-meter radius of who it targets, when we combine that with Divine Retribution and Archon Vitality, we end up with hundreds of heat stacks with one cast from the 16 pillars we have when we have Growing Power active and Molt Augmented fully stacked. Sadly, Pyrotechnics radius isn't improved from ability range, but honestly if it was, it would be completely broken. Just like with Ember's Fireblast casting rotation, we're going to want to do Spears, Chakram, Pyrotechnics for maximum damage output, as like with the Fireblast build, we're going to be running lower duration, which allows us to ignore the second cast of Spears to activate Divine Retribution, and instead go for more damage. For Aura slot, we have Growing Power to boost up our damage and increase the number of pillars from Pyrotechnics. Cunning Drift again for more range, and like the others, Divine Retribution for more damage, and Archon Vitality for more heat stacks. Overextended and Augur Reach for more range, and like with the Thermal Sunder build, throw on those Pistol Augur mods for more shield regeneration from the set bonus. Then we have a down-ranked Fleeting Expertise for the extra ability efficiency and minus to duration. Like I mentioned in the Fireblast build, we don't want to have this maxed ranked as that will give us too much ability duration reduction and may cause us to not be able to double cast Pyrotechnics. Next we have Transient Fortitude, Blind Rage, and Umbral Intensify for even more power strength. Arcanes wise, we once again have Molt Augmented for more strength to increase our damage, damage multipliers, and number of pillars, and Energize to help with our energy. Next, we have Kullervo's Helminth Wrathful Advance. When you activate this ability, it'll increase your critical chance of your melee attack by a massive flat amount and also teleport you to the targeted enemy, dealing a heavy attack on that enemy. You might be wondering why this is one of the big damage output abilities. Why would a melee attack help us, considering that, as we've said multiple times, Divine Retribution only buffs slash, heat, and toxin status effects? Well, when we combine this with a weapon that has a guaranteed slash proc on heavy attack, like my hate build here on screen, we end up having a slash proc that deals a completely insane amount of damage. The one important thing to know with this is that we need to get our Hate Incarnate activated first, so just do your light attacks to get it activated and then you're good to go. This will also make it so that the Hate applies a heat stack, but it's mainly there for the overall increase to its damage output from the Incarnate evolution. Since Blazing Chakram will apply a heat stack, that will activate the damage increase from burning hate, and it and Galvanized Elementalist will increase the damage from its slash proc even further. Again, we have a bit of a different cast rotation here, which is Spears, Chakram, and then the heavy attack caused by Wrathful Advance, at which point the Divine Spears will self-deactivate from duration to condense the slash and whatever heat effects we've gotten on the enemies. For Nezha's build with this, we have Growing Power to again increase our damage multipliers and boost the critical chance increase from Wrathful Advance with its power strength. But you can definitely swap this around for a Steel Charge for more melee damage, Empowered Blades to increase our heavy attack, or Ready Steel for greater initial combo counter to boost the heavy attack's damage. Again, we have Cunning Drift to increase our range, the mandatory Divine Retribution, Overextended for more range for Divine Spears, and Transient Fortitude, Blind Rage, and Umbral Intensify for even more power strength. This time, since we aren't really using heat as much, I've gone with Umbral Vitality for health to give us a bit more power strength from Umbral Intensify's set bonus. I've gone with a further downranked Fleeting Expertise because I've found that having 2 from the max to be just the right amount of duration to be able to cast both Blazing Chakram and Wrathful Advance. Again, we're using Archon Stretch for some free energy regeneration being activated by a companion, and of course to boost up our range a bit more. For Arcanes, we're using Molt Augmented for more strength, and Arcane Fury to increase our hate's damage, thus increasing its guaranteed slash procs damage. If you find yourself having energy issues though, just swap this out for an Arcane Energized, don't worry, you'll still be doing very good damage. And last but not least, we have Dante's Helminth Dark Verse. This Helminth will deal 2 slash procs to each enemy within a frontal cone of Nezha, so we have to keep that cone in mind when we're moving around in a mission and before we cast, which can cause some issues if you make a mistake on when you cast it. Because of that, we're going to be running a bit more duration on here than some of our other builds to account for needing to reposition to maximize enemies hit by Dark Verse. With that, we're also going to be changing up our casting rotation a bit. So with Dark Verse, it'll be Spears, Chakram, Dark Verse 2 times, then slam him into the ground by recasting Spears or by letting its duration naturally expire. For the build, we once again have Growing Power in our aura slot for more power strength, Cunning Drift for more range, Divine Retribution to boost up Dark vs slash procs damage, Augur Reach for range and the set bonus giving us shields for survivability, Overextended for even more range, Umbral Vitality and Intensify for health and more power strength, Equilibrium for energy sustain when we combine it with Blazing Chakram's health orb generation, and this time we're using a maxed rank Fleeting Expertise to bring our duration down and to recover some of our efficiency we lost from Blind Rage. Again, we're using Molt Augmented for more power strength, which means more damage, and Arcane Energize for more energy sustain. Alright, so if you made it this far, hell yeah to you. As you can tell, I really love Nezha enough to have 6 different builds all based around this one augment, and all of them are very unique and incredibly fun to play with. Well, actually, I've got a 7th secret weapon platform build, which you're seeing on screen right now. If you want to see that build, you'll have to check out today's short, which is linked in the description in the pinned comment. Trust me, it's worth it, it's pretty crazy as well. With the combos that we've gone over, you should have options for all levels of play, from just getting into the steel path all the way to level cap, and the necessary tools to be able to utilize them and deal with anything that you may be faced with. Let me know in the comments what you think of something much longer than I usually do, and as always, sub for more tips and swing by my Twitch if you need any help.